A black waitress warned the Mafia boss not to drink. Seconds later, his fiancée panicked. Why did the waitress urgently warn him not to touch his drink? What caused his fiancée to panic only seconds later? Hello, everyone, and welcome to 7Tev Stories, where sudden warnings, hidden intentions, and shocking reactions reveal more than words ever could. Before today's story begins, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping episode. Thank you for watching, commenting, sharing, and continuing to support our growing channel. Every viewer helps 7Tev Stories bring these powerful narratives to a wider audience. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We truly appreciate having you here with us. Now, get comfortable, remain alert to every detail, and let us step into the first moments of today's suspenseful story. He thought the most dangerous thing at that table was the man everyone feared, but the real danger was waiting inside a glass he was seconds away from drinking. Maya Bennett saw it before anyone else did. Not the guests laughing beneath the chandeliers, not the nervous manager hovering near the kitchen doors, not even Alexander Moretti's own security standing 10 feet away with their eyes on every exit. She saw it because people like her survived by noticing what powerful people believed they could hide. The silver dove glittered around her in warm gold and polished silver, a restaurant where a single bottle of wine could cost more than her monthly rent in Queens, and where women in black uniforms were expected to smile, serve, and disappear. Maya had spent 6 months perfecting that disappearance. She moved quietly between tables, her dark curls pinned back, her hands steady, her face calm, carrying plates worth more than her paycheck and listening to men speak as if the world had been built only for them. But tonight, at table 7, invisibility became impossible. Alexander Moretti sat at the center of the private dining room like a storm dressed in a tailored black suit. 36 years old, broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, and silent enough to make the whole room adjust itself around him. He did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. His fiancée, Claire Whitmore, sat beside him in ivory silk, her smile flawless, her diamond ring flashing each time she touched his wrist. Everyone in the room thought they were watching a love story wrapped in money and power. Maya knew better the moment Claire asked for a fresh glass. It was such a small request, almost too small to matter. "This one has a mark," Claire said softly, holding up Alexander's wineglass with a delicate frown. Daniel Cross, the manager, snapped his fingers at Maya as if calling a dog, and Maya stepped forward with a clean glass on a white linen tray. She was supposed to replace it, pour, and leave. That was all. But as Claire's hand brushed the rim of the new glass, Maya noticed the faintest dusting of something pale beneath the diamond setting of her ring. Not powder exactly. Not sugar. Something too fine, too deliberate, catching the candlelight for half a second before vanishing against the crystal. Maya's breath tightened. Her father had once told her that danger rarely entered a room shouting. Sometimes it smiled, wore perfume, and waited for someone else to lift the glass. Alexander reached for the wine. Claire's eyes did not move to his face. They stayed on the rim. Maya felt the dining room stretch into silence, though the piano still played and forks still touched porcelain in the distance. A drop of red wine slid down the outside of the glass and landed on the white tablecloth. It should have bloomed bright crimson. Instead, beneath the flame of the candle, it darkened at the edge like a bruise. Maya's fingers went cold around the bottle. If she was wrong, she would lose her job. If she was right and stayed quiet, a man would collapse in front of her while everyone pretended not to understand why. Alexander lifted the glass toward his mouth. Claire's smile sharpened. Maya stepped closer, leaned in as if to adjust the setting, and whispered the 6 words that shattered the evening. "Sir, don't drink that wine." For one heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Claire Whitmore's fork slipped from her hand and struck the plate with a sound that made every head turn. The sound of Claire's fork striking porcelain did not belong to the soft music, the low conversation, or the careful elegance of the silver dove. It cut through the private dining room like a secret falling out in public. Alexander Moretti did not drink. His hand stopped with the glass less than an inch from his mouth, and for the first time that evening, the man everyone feared looked not at the room, not at his guards, not at Maya Bennett, but at the woman seated beside him. Claire Whitmore recovered quickly, too quickly. Her smile came back, polished and bright, but the color had already drained from beneath her makeup. "How dramatic," she said, her voice light enough for guests to mistake it for amusement. "Alexander, she is obviously confused." Maya kept her hands folded in front of her black apron, though every nerve in her body screamed for her to step backward. Daniel Cross moved first, rushing from the edge of the room with his jaw tight and his eyes burning with panic that looked too much like guilt. "Maya," he hissed under his breath, "apologize now." Around them, the Silver Dove held its breath beneath chandeliers imported from Italy, beneath cream-colored walls lined with framed photographs of governors, judges, musicians, and men whose names appeared in society magazines. This was the kind of place where a salad cost $40, where the carpet was cleaned twice a day, where the wealthy came to pretend their hands had never touched anything dirty. Maya knew every inch of it. She knew the marble bar that reflected candlelight like still water. She knew the silver carts that rolled between tables without making a sound. She knew the private hallway where celebrities entered through the back so they would not be photographed. And she knew that people like her were only welcome as long as they remained useful, silent, and forgettable. Earlier that evening, before Alexander arrived, Daniel had inspected her uniform like he was searching for a reason to send her home. "Table 7 is not a regular table," he had told her near the service station, his voice low and sharp. "No opinions. No questions. No personality. You pour, you nod. And you vanish." Maya had nodded because rent was due in 6 days, because her younger brother still needed help with community college tuition, and because her mother's old medical bills still arrived in envelopes stamped final notice. She had not come to the Silver Dove to be brave. She had come to survive. But survival had trained her better than any school ever could. It taught her to read a room before entering it, to hear the difference between a laugh and a warning, to notice when a woman smiled with her mouth while her hands betrayed her. Now all of those lessons stood between Alexander Moretti and the untouched glass in his hand. Claire reached for his wrist, gentle, graceful, almost affectionate. "Please," she said, softly enough to sound wounded. "Do not let a waitress embarrass us." That word landed harder than an insult because she said it as if Maya's job erased her judgment, as if carrying plates meant she could not carry the truth. Alexander slowly lowered the glass to the table. The base touched the linen without a sound. His eyes stayed on Claire for one long moment, then shifted to Maya. They were dark, controlled, and unreadable. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. Maya felt every eye in the private dining room turn toward her, and for a moment, the air seemed heavier than the chandeliers above them. She could hear the ice settling in a bucket near the wall, the quiet breath of a woman at the next table, the soft click of Daniel Cross swallowing his anger behind her. Alexander Moretti had asked her a simple question, but nothing about the room was simple now. One wrong word could turn her from a server into a liar, from a witness into a problem, from invisible into exposed. She looked at the glass on the table. The wine sat perfectly still, deep red beneath the candlelight, beautiful enough to hide anything. "She asked me to replace your glass," Maya said, keeping her voice low but clear. "When I brought the clean one, I saw something on her ring. A pale dust, just under the setting. Then she touched the rim before I poured." Claire gave a soft laugh, the kind meant to make everyone else laugh with her, but no one did. "This is ridiculous. My ring came from a jeweler on 5th Avenue, not some back alley." Her words were dressed in elegance, but her hand had moved beneath the table. Maya noticed that too. Alexander noticed Maya noticing. He leaned back slightly, his expression calm enough to make the silence even worse. "Continue," he said. Maya drew a slow breath. After I poured, a drop hit the tablecloth. It darkened at the edge. Wine does not usually do that on untreated linen. Daniel stepped in so fast his polished shoes nearly slipped against the marble border. Mr. Moretti, I am deeply sorry. She has been working too many double shifts. I will handle this privately. You will stand there, Alexander said without raising his voice. Daniel stopped as if the words had locked his feet to the floor. Claire's smile thinned. Alexander, this is embarrassing. We came here to celebrate our engagement, not entertain a fantasy from someone looking for attention. Maya's cheeks burned, but she did not drop her eyes. That had always been the trick people like Claire used. They did not need to prove you wrong if they could make you feel small enough to silence yourself. Maya had learned that lesson at hospital counters, collection offices, apartment viewings, and staff meetings where her name was forgotten but her mistakes were remembered. She had spent years lowering her voice so other people could feel comfortable. Not tonight. I am not looking for attention, Maya said. I am looking at the glass. The words landed quietly, but they changed the room. Alexander turned his head toward Ethan Graves, his closest security man, who stood near the velvet curtain with one hand folded over the other. Ethan understood without being told. He stepped forward, took a clean linen napkin from the service cart, and gently lifted the glass by the stem without touching the rim. Claire's breathing changed. Only a little. Only enough for Maya to hear it. Alexander heard it too. Claire, he said, still calm, still unreadable, if she is wrong, this ends with an apology. Claire sat straighter, grateful too soon. Then Alexander pushed the untouched glass an inch toward her and finished the sentence. So. Prove it. The room went silent. Claire Whitmore stared at the glass as if it had suddenly become a stranger sitting at the table with them. For a woman who had spent the entire evening arranging her face into perfect softness, the hesitation was small, but it was enough. Her fingers hovered above the stem, paused, then withdrew to smooth the napkin on her lap. Do not be absurd, she said, but her voice had lost its velvet edge. I am not performing for your staff. Alexander did not blink. You said she was confused. She is. Then drink. The words were quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that made them heavier. Around the room, the guests who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. A man in a navy suit lowered his menu. A woman near the window pressed her lips together. The pianist missed a note, recovered, and then stopped playing altogether. The Silver Dove, with all its polished wealth and careful manners, had become a room full of people watching a truth no one wanted to name. Daniel Cross took one step forward, sweat shining at his temple despite the cool air drifting from the vents above. Mr. Moretti, perhaps the kitchen can bring another bottle. On the house, of course. This entire situation is unfortunate, but there is no need to upset Miss Whitmore. Alexander slowly turned his head toward him. Why are you upset, Daniel? The manager froze. It was the first time Alexander had used his name that evening. Maya felt a chill move across her shoulders. Daniel had introduced himself twice, loudly, proudly, but Alexander had barely acknowledged him. Now he remembered. That meant he had been listening longer than anyone realized. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a smile that looked painful. I am only concerned about the reputation of the restaurant. No, Alexander said. You are concerned about the glass. Claire stood so suddenly her chair scraped the floor. I will not be insulted like this. Her diamond ring flashed again, and Maya saw her thumb press against the underside of the setting, rubbing hard as if trying to erase whatever remained there. It was the same nervous motion Maya had seen years ago in a hospital waiting room when a well-dressed man kept wiping his cuff after speaking to her father. That memory came back without warning. Her father in his brown driver's jacket. Her mother crying into a paper cup of vending machine coffee. the doctor using careful words that explained nothing. And before all of it, one dinner party, one rich family, one glass no one questioned. Maya had been 19 then, old enough to understand loss, too young to know what to do with rage. Since that night, she had watched hands. Not faces. Hands told the truth first. Claire's hands were telling the truth now. Ethan placed the glass on a small silver tray and set it at the center of the table, untouched, visible to everyone. Alexander looked at Maya again. Not like a boss looking at a waitress. Not like a powerful man looking at someone beneath him. Like a man who had just realized the only honest eyes in the room belonged to the woman everyone else dismissed. Maya, he said, her name measured and deliberate, when she changed the glass, did anyone else touch it? Maya looked toward Daniel. Daniel went pale. The room understood before she answered. Maya did not answer quickly, and that made Daniel Cross look even more frightened. She could feel him staring at her, silently begging, warning, and accusing all at once. 6 months of working under him had taught her what that look meant. It meant remember who signs the schedule. It meant remember who can cut your hours. It meant remember that women like you do not win when rich people decide you are inconvenient. But Alexander Moretti had asked her a question in front of everyone, and for once, the room could not pretend her voice did not matter. Maya looked from the glass to the silver service cart near the velvet wall. Daniel touched the tray before I brought it out, she said. He told me table 7 needed a fresh glass immediately. He also told me not to look at the table too much. Daniel laughed, but it came out thin and broken. That is because staring at guests is unprofessional. I was not staring, Maya said. I was watching. There was a difference, and everyone in the room felt it. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Alexander remained seated, one hand resting near the untouched wineglass, his expression as still as stone under winter light. He looked at Daniel the way a judge might look at a man who had just remembered his own mistake too late. Why did you choose her? Alexander asked. Daniel blinked. Excuse me? For this table. Why Maya? The manager's face shifted through 3 answers before landing on the safest one. She is one of our best servers. Maya almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the lie was so clean it sounded practiced. 2 hours earlier, Daniel had told her she was lucky to have a job at all. Last week, he had given the best shifts to servers who smiled at his jokes and called Maya difficult for asking why her tips were short. Yesterday, he had reminded her that customers came to the Silver Dove for comfort, not attitude. Now, with Alexander watching him, Maya had suddenly become one of the best. That is not what you said before service, Maya said. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire seized the opening. Alexander, this is becoming cruel. You are letting a disgruntled employee humiliate people who care about you. Her voice trembled in just the right place, but Maya saw her thumb still rubbing the inside of the ring. Harder now. Faster. That small motion pulled Maya backward through time again, into the narrow hallway of her childhood apartment in Brooklyn, where her mother used to count cash on the kitchen table after double shifts at a clinic. Her father, Samuel Bennett, had always told Maya that dignity was not how people treated you when you were useful. Dignity was what you refused to surrender when they tried to make you small. He had been a driver for powerful families, opening doors, carrying bags, hearing secrets from the front seat while rich people forgot he had ears. The week before he died, he told Maya something strange. Watch the hands, baby girl. Faces know how to lie. She had not understood then. She understood now. Alexander's voice pulled her back. Maya, did Daniel hand you the glass himself? She nodded once. Yes. Ethan Graves stepped closer to the service cart and lifted the folded napkin beneath the spare. Crystalware. A faint dusting marked the white fabric. Daniel stopped breathing. Claire sat down slowly, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. Alexander looked at the napkin, then at Maya, and the room finally understood that the waitress had not interrupted the evening. She had uncovered it. The faint dust on the napkin looked almost harmless, a pale smear against expensive white linen, the kind of thing most people would have ignored and later sworn they never saw. But now no one could look away from it. Ethan Graves folded the napkin carefully, placed it beside the untouched glass, and gave Alexander a quiet nod that said more than any speech could. Daniel Cross tried to step back, but the service cart blocked him. Claire's eyes moved from the napkin to Daniel, then to the nearest exit, and Maya saw the truth pass between them like a wire pulled tight. They knew each other. Not casually. Not as strangers forced into the same bad moment. They knew each other in the way guilty people do, with glances that carry instructions. Alexander saw it too. His face did not change, but the room seemed to grow colder around him. "Phones on the table," he said. No one moved at first. Then one guest slowly placed a black cell phone beside his water glass. Another followed. A woman near the windows did the same with trembling fingers. Alexander was not shouting, yet every person obeyed as if the walls themselves had repeated the command. Claire lifted her chin. "You are turning a misunderstanding into theater." "No," Alexander said. "You did that when you invited half the room to watch me celebrate a future you never intended to live." The word struck her harder than anger would have. Her perfect expression cracked for half a second, and beneath it Maya saw something colder than fear. Calculation. Claire was not thinking about love, embarrassment, or even betrayal. She was thinking about what could still be saved. Maya had seen that look before on landlords, hospital clerks, and men in tailored coats who believed consequences were only for people without money. Daniel's phone buzzed against the service cart. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt enormous. Ethan picked it up before Daniel could reach for it. The screen lit with a message preview from an unsaved number. It was only a few words, but Maya caught enough to understand. "Is it done yet?" Daniel's mouth opened, but no excuse came out. Claire closed her eyes for the smallest breath, and that was when Alexander knew the message had not surprised her. The private dining room became still enough to hear the rain beginning against the tall windows, soft at first, then steady, turning the city outside into streaks of silver and black. Maya stood beside the table with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She wanted to disappear again. She wanted to be back in the ordinary world of coffee refills, late buses, and shoes that hurt after a 10-hour shift. But she had stepped across a line that could not be uncrossed. Alexander turned to her, and for the first time, his voice lost its edge. "Did anyone ask you to leave this table after you noticed the glass?" Maya looked at Daniel. He shook his head once, barely moving, a silent warning dressed as a plea. She remembered her father's voice again, gentle but firm, telling her that fear was useful only until truth needed room to breathe. "Yes," she said. "Daniel told me to stop thinking and keep serving." A murmur moved through the room. Daniel looked smaller under the chandelier light, all polish and no dignity. Claire reached for her purse, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the careful grace of someone trying to act normal. Ethan saw it and simply placed his hand over the purse before she could lift it. No force. No scene. Just a boundary she could not cross. Alexander looked at Claire's hand resting frozen above the table, then at the ring that had glittered all evening like a promise. "Take it off," he said. Claire's face went pale. Maya stopped breathing. Because the moment Claire refused, everyone would know the ring was not just jewelry. It was the first honest thing her body had told all night. Claire looked down at the ring as if Alexander had asked her to remove a piece of her own skin. The diamond caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the table, bright little fragments dancing. Over the untouched wineglass, the folded napkin, and the faces of people who had paid hundreds of dollars to feel important, only to find themselves trapped in a silence money could not soften. "This ring was given to me by you," Claire said, her voice delicate, wounded, rehearsed. "Are you really going to shame me with it in front of strangers?" Alexander did not look away. "Take it off." Maya watched Claire's fingers curl inward. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to protect the underside of the setting. That was where the pale dust had been. That was where her thumb kept returning. Daniel Cross stared at the floor, his face drained of the confident cruelty he wore when speaking to staff. For 6 months, Maya had seen him correct black servers more sharply than everyone else, watched him laugh with wealthy guests after blaming mistakes on the kitchen, watched him treat dignity like something that belonged only to people who could afford the wine list. Now he looked like a man who had mistaken silence for loyalty. Claire slowly twisted the ring. It did not move easily. Her hand trembled, and she tried to hide it by smiling. "Alexander, please. You know me." Something passed through his eyes then, not softness, not forgiveness, but the cold ache of a man realizing he had mistaken beauty for truth. That is what makes this worse. The room absorbed those words and held them. Claire pulled harder. The ring slid free at last, leaving a faint mark around her finger. Ethan placed a clean saucer in front of her. She set the ring down, but the second it touched porcelain, Maya saw the tiny compartment beneath the stone shift open, no larger than a grain of rice. A pale trace clung to the edge. No one spoke. Even Claire seemed to understand that her performance had finally run out of room. Alexander looked at Ethan. Ethan covered the saucer with another linen napkin and moved it away from the table with steady care. There was no panic in him, no dramatic gesture, only the calm precision of someone preserving evidence. Daniel suddenly found his voice. "I did not know what it was," he said, the words spilling out too fast. "She told me it was harmless. She said it would only make him feel unwell, just enough to cancel the announcement." Claire turned on him with a glare so sharp it stripped away every trace of elegance she had been wearing. "Be quiet." But it was too late. The lie had opened, and everyone had heard the first thing crawl out. Maya felt her knees weaken, not from fear this time, but from the weight of being right. Being right did not feel powerful. It felt lonely. It felt like standing in the middle of a beautiful room and realizing how many people had been willing to let ugliness hide under candlelight. Alexander rose from his chair. He was not loud. He did not need to be. The simple act of him standing changed the shape of the room. Claire stepped back, her hands empty now, her face stripped of its polished calm. Daniel whispered something that sounded like an apology, though no one believed it was meant for Maya. Alexander turned toward her, and the entire room followed his gaze. For the first time that night, Maya was not the server, not the interruption, not the woman people expected to vanish. She was the reason the truth had survived long enough to be seen. "Maya Bennett," Alexander said, saying her full name with a respect that made Daniel flinch, "you will not be punished for telling the truth in my presence." Then he looked at Claire and Daniel, and his voice dropped into something quiet enough to chill the air. "But everyone who tried to bury it will answer for what they have done." The rain pressed harder against the windows, and the silver dove remained perfectly still. The first person to move was not Claire, not Daniel, and not even Alexander. It was a busboy named Luis, barely 20 years old, standing near the service station with a tray of untouched bread plates trembling in his hands. He looked at Maya the way frightened people look at someone who has just done what they were too scared to do, and in that look, Maya understood that she had not been the only one noticing things. The silver dove had secrets in its walls. Staff members knew when private guests arrived through the back door without reservations. Bartenders knew which names were never entered into the computer. Hosts knew when Daniel Cross changed seating charts at the last second and told everyone not to ask why. But knowing and speaking were two different kinds of danger. Alexander turned toward the room, his black suit sharp beneath the gold light, his pale face controlled, his presence filling the space without effort. "No one leaves," he said. The doors remained closed. No one argued. Claire folded her empty hand over the finger where the ring had been and tried to reclaim the dignity she had already lost. "You cannot hold an entire room because a waitress invented a story." Maya felt the word hit the same old bruise. A waitress. Not Maya. Not Miss Bennet. Not the woman who noticed the ring, the glass, the napkin, the message, and the fear. Just a job title Claire thought could be used as a broom to sweep her out of the truth. Alexander stepped around the table, stopping beside Maya rather than in front of her. The choice was subtle, but everyone saw it. He was not shielding her because she was weak. He was standing beside her because she had earned the right to be heard. "She did not invent your hesitation," he said. "She did not invent Daniel's message. She did not invent the compartment in your ring." Claire looked toward the windows, where rain traced silver lines over the glass and blurred the lights of Manhattan into soft, distant stars. For 1 second, she looked almost human, almost young, almost trapped by the life she had chosen. Then her face hardened again. "You think this makes you safe?" she asked quietly. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but Alexander lifted one hand, stopping any reaction before it began. There was no need for force in a room where truth was already doing the work. Daniel sank into a chair as if his body had finally run out of excuses. "It was not supposed to go this far," he whispered. "She said it was business. She said nobody would get hurt." Maya turned slowly toward him. The word sounded familiar, not because she had heard them from Daniel before, but because cowardice always spoke the same language. "It was not supposed to happen. I did not know. I was only following instructions." Her father had been buried beneath phrases like that. Alexander looked at Daniel with quiet contempt. "Who sent the message?" Daniel pressed his lips together. Claire stared at him with a warning sharper than speech. Maya watched his right hand drift toward his jacket pocket, not fast, not threatening, only desperate. Ethan reached the pocket first and removed a folded reservation card. On the back was a name written in blue ink. Victor Kane. The room shifted. Even guests who knew nothing about private wars understood the way Alexander's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Old history had just walked into the room without opening the door. Maya felt the air tighten around her. Victor Kane was not just a name from her father's past. He was the name her mother had once whispered in the kitchen after the funeral, then never said again. Alexander noticed the color leave Maya's face. "You know him," he said. It was not a question. Maya looked at the reservation card, then at the glass, then at Claire, whose silence had become an answer. Her voice came out low, but steady. "My father worked for him before he died." For the first time all night, Alexander Moretti looked truly shaken. Not by Claire's betrayal. Not by Daniel's confession. But by the realization that the woman who had saved him had been standing inside this story long before he ever sat down at table 7. Maya had spent 8 years trying not to say Victor Kane's name out loud. It had lived in her family like a locked drawer, present but never opened, heavy enough to change the shape of every room. Her mother would turn off the television whenever his face appeared beside charity galas or downtown development projects. Her younger brother, Marcus, had once asked why their father stopped driving for rich people, and the apartment had gone so quiet that even the refrigerator seemed too loud. Maya had learned early that grief had rules. Do not ask too much. Do not remember too clearly. Do not say the name of the man who walked away untouched while your family learned how expensive survival could be. But now that name sat on a reservation card in Ethan Graves' hand, written in blue ink, connecting Claire Whitmore, Daniel Cross, the glass, and the father Maya. Still missed every morning. Alexander watched her face with a focus that felt different from suspicion. It was careful, almost respectful, as if he understood that some truths needed room before they could stand. "Tell me what you know," he said. Maya's throat tightened. Claire gave a small laugh, but it came out dry and frightened. "This is becoming a family therapy session for the help." The words were cruel enough to make several guests look away. Maya did not. The old version of her might have lowered her eyes, swallowed the insult, and apologized for taking up space. But something had shifted when Alexander said her full name. Not because a powerful man had given her permission to exist, but because the truth had finally placed itself in her hands, and she refused to drop it. "My father was Samuel Bennett," she said. "He drove for Victor Kane for almost 2 years. Private dinners, airport pickups, late meetings in Manhattan and Long Island. He heard things he was not supposed to hear because people forget drivers are people." Alexander's expression hardened at the edges. Ethan looked down at the card again. Daniel stared at Maya as if seeing her for the first time and realizing she had never been small at all. "One night, my father came home scared," Maya continued. "Not nervous. Scared. He told my mother he had heard about a deal that would ruin people who trusted Kane. He said there were names, accounts, signatures. He said he had proof hidden somewhere safe." Her voice wavered, but she held it steady. "The next week, he was gone. No one asked what she meant. They did not need to. The room understood loss without needing details. Even the rain seemed to soften against the glass." Alexander stepped closer to the table, his eyes fixed on the reservation card. "Why did you not report it?" he asked, not accusing, only asking. Maya smiled sadly. "We tried. My mother took what little we had to people in offices with clean carpets and locked smiles. They told her there was no evidence. They told her my father must have been confused. They told her to move on." Her gaze moved to Claire. "Rich people are very good at telling the grieving to move on." Claire's face tightened, but she said nothing. For once, silence was the only defense she had left. Then Daniel's phone buzzed again from Ethan's hand. This time, the screen lit up with an incoming call. No name. Just a number. Ethan looked at Alexander. Alexander looked at Maya, and she understood before he spoke. "Answer it," he said. Ethan tapped the screen and placed the phone on the table. A man's voice filled the silent room, smooth, calm, familiar to Maya only from nightmares built out of her mother's whispers. "Daniel, tell Claire to stop improvising and finish the evening." Maya felt the floor tilt beneath her. Alexander did not move. Claire closed her eyes. Daniel covered his face with both hands. And across the table, the untouched glass of wine sat like a witness that had finally learned how to speak. Victor Kane's voice lingered over the table long after the phone went quiet, smooth enough to belong in a boardroom and cold enough to explain why Maya's mother still lowered her voice when speaking about the past. No one moved. The rain tapped against the windows, the candles flickered, and the expensive room seemed suddenly too small for the truth it had been hiding. Alexander Moretti looked at the phone, then at Claire, and something ancient and controlled passed through his face. Not surprise. Not panic. Recognition sharpened by disappointment. "So Kane is still hiding behind other people's hands," he said. Claire swallowed, but her pride made one final attempt to stand. "You have no idea what you are stepping into." Alexander gave her a quiet look. "I know exactly what I am stepping out of." The word struck the table harder than shouting ever could. They were not about the glass anymore. They were about an engagement, a partnership, a future arranged like a contract and dressed like romance. Claire had built herself into the perfect fiancée, but perfection had always been a costume, and now every seam was showing. Daniel Cross lowered his hands from his face. "I only did what I was told," he whispered. Maya turned toward him with a sadness that surprised even herself. That is what men said after my father died. Daniel flinched as if the sentence had reached a place inside him no excuse could protect. Alexander noticed. The guests noticed. Even Claire noticed, though she quickly looked away. Ethan Graves placed Daniel's phone beside the reservation card, the ring, the napkin, and the untouched glass, arranging them carefully on the table like pieces of a story that had finally agreed to be seen. "We need to move this somewhere secure," Ethan said. His voice remained low, professional, and calm. Alexander nodded once. "The wine cellar." Claire's head snapped up. "You cannot just take over this restaurant." Alexander looked toward the closed kitchen doors, where staff members stood in a line of frightened silence. Louise still held the tray of bread plates. A hostess clutched a stack of menus against her chest. Two line cooks watched from behind the service window, their white coats bright under the kitchen lights. "This restaurant has already been taken over," Alexander said. "Just not by me." Then he turned to Maya. "You do not have to come with us." For the first time all evening, someone powerful gave her a choice instead of an order. The difference nearly broke her. Maya looked at the evidence on the table, then at the people who had called her confused, dramatic, disgruntled, and invisible. She thought of her father coming home late with tired eyes and a gentle smile. She thought of her mother standing in offices where people with clean hands told her to stop asking questions. She thought of every time silence had been sold to her as safety. "Yes," Maya said, her voice steady. "I do." Alexander studied her for a moment, and the respect in his eyes was not soft. It was solid. Ethan lifted the tray of evidence. Daniel stood only when instructed, pale and shaken. Claire walked last, her empty ring finger curled into her palm. As they passed through the restaurant, conversations died table by table. Wealthy guests turned in their chairs. Staff members stepped aside, not because Maya was carrying plates this time, but because she was carrying the truth. At the cellar door, Alexander paused and looked back at the room. "No one touches her job, her paycheck, or her name," he said. "Not tonight. Not ever." Daniel lowered his eyes. Claire said nothing. Maya stepped down into the cool cellar air, surrounded by rows of bottles sleeping in darkness, and understood that the life she had known before Table 7 had ended the second she chose to speak. The wine cellar beneath the Silver Dove was colder than Maya expected, a long stone room lined with wooden racks that stretched into the shadows like church pews for bottles that cost more than most people's cars. The air smelled of oak, cork, rainwater, and old money. Above them, the restaurant still hummed with frightened silence, but down here every small sound became honest: Daniel's uneven breathing, Claire's heels clicking against the stone floor, Ethan setting the evidence tray on a tasting table with careful hands. Alexander stood beneath a low amber light, his face half in shadow, the polished power of the dining room stripped down to something quieter and more dangerous. Not dangerous in the way people whispered about him. Dangerous because he was thinking. Claire kept her arms folded, trying to look offended instead of cornered. Daniel would not meet anyone's eyes. Maya stood near the stairs, close enough to leave, far enough to feel the cold from the cellar walls through her uniform. She had followed the truth this far, but now that the door was closed behind them, the weight of it pressed against her ribs. Alexander looked at the phone, the ring, the napkin, the glass, and the reservation card. Then he looked at Maya. "Your father said he had proof," he said. "Did your family ever find it?" Maya shook her head, then stopped. For years, the answer had been no. It had been easier that way, cleaner, less painful. But there had been something her mother kept in a shoebox at the back of the linen closet: old receipts, a photograph of Samuel Bennett in his driver's cap, a folded map with circles around addresses Maya never understood, and a silver flash drive taped beneath the cardboard bottom. Her mother had told her never to touch it unless the past came looking for them first. Maya had thought the past was a ghost. Tonight, it had walked into the Silver Dove wearing Claire Whitmore's diamond ring. Maybe, Maya whispered. Alexander's eyes sharpened. Maybe? Maya swallowed. My mother kept something. She never let me open it. She said if people ever started asking about my father again, should take it somewhere safe. Daniel lifted his head slowly, and the fear in his face changed shape. Claire saw it too. She is lying, Claire said quickly. Too quickly. She wants money. That is what this is. Maya turned to her, and the cold in the cellar seemed to settle into her spine. You keep saying what I want because you cannot understand what it means to do something without being paid for it. Claire's mouth closed. Alexander looked away for a moment, and Maya saw the sentence land somewhere deep. A man like him understood transactions. Favors. Debt. Leverage. But Maya had not whispered in that dining room for leverage. She had done it because a life was a life, even when it belonged to a man the city feared. Ethan checked Daniel's phone again and found a chain of messages, short, coded, careful enough to hide from careless eyes but not from people who knew what betrayal sounded like. Restaurant confirmed. Ring ready. Manager compliant. Announcement tonight. No one spoke as Ethan read them aloud. Claire's posture weakened with every sentence. Daniel sat down on a wooden crate, pressing his hands together like prayer could rewrite a choice already made. Alexander placed one hand on the tasting table and leaned forward slightly. You were not marrying me, he said to Claire. You were delivering me. The words were quiet, but they emptied the room. Claire looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time there was no charm left in her face. Only calculation collapsing into fear. Victor Kane will not stop because a server noticed a glass, she said. Maya stepped away from the stairs. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the cellar with more strength than she felt. No. But he might stop smiling when Samuel Bennett's daughter finally opens what he died protecting. Alexander turned to her, and something in his expression changed. Not pity. Not surprise. Something heavier. Respect mixed with regret. Then we get your mother, he said. Maya shook her head once. No. We call her first. She has spent 8 years being afraid of men showing up without warning. Nobody does that to her again. Ethan looked at Alexander, waiting for the old kind of order. Alexander did not give it. He simply nodded. Your way, he said. And in that cold cellar beneath a room full of silent witnesses, Maya Bennett realized the most powerful man in the building had just done something no one in power had ever done for her family before. He listened. Maya called her mother from the cellar stairs because it was the only place where the signal reached through stone and silence. The phone rang 4 times before Ruth Bennett answered, her voice cautious the way it had been for 8 years, as if every unknown number might carry the past back into her kitchen. Mama, Maya said softly, and all the strength she had shown upstairs nearly broke apart at that single word. Ruth heard it immediately. Mothers always heard the crack beneath the calm. Maya, what happened? Maya turned away from Claire, Daniel, Ethan, and Alexander, not because she was ashamed, but because some parts of fear belonged only to family. I need to ask you about Dad's shoebox, she said. The line went silent. In that silence, Maya could hear her mother's apartment in Brooklyn as if she were standing there, the old wall clock above the stove, the radiator knocking in the corner, the small television Ruth kept on low so the rooms did not feel empty. Why are you asking me that tonight? Ruth whispered. Maya closed her eyes. Because Victor Kane's name just showed up in front of me. A soft breath left Ruth, and for a moment she sounded older than her 62 years. Alexander stood several feet away, close enough to understand, far enough to respect the boundary he had been given. That distance mattered. Maya noticed. Are you safe? Ruth asked. Maya looked at the cold cellar, the untouched evidence, Claire's pale face, Daniel's bowed head, and the man the city feared standing quietly while a black waitress decided what happened next. For the first time in a long time, Maya said, "I think I might be." Ruth did not ask for details. She only said, "The flash drive is still there. Under the bottom cardboard. Your father taped it with gray duct tape. I never opened it. I was too scared that knowing would put you and Marcus in more danger." Maya pressed her hand to the stone wall, steadying herself. "Mama, I need you to get it." Ruth's breathing trembled, but her voice did not. "No. You need to come home and get it yourself. I am not handing your father's last truth to a stranger." Maya looked back at Alexander. He had heard enough to understand the answer. He nodded once, accepting it before she even repeated it. "We are coming to you," Maya said. Ruth's voice sharpened with the old fear. "Who is we?" Maya hesitated. Alexander stepped closer, not taking the phone, not demanding to speak, just lowering his voice enough for Ruth to hear through the quiet. "Mrs. Bennet, my name is Alexander Moretti. Your daughter saved my life tonight by doing what everyone else was too afraid to do. I will not send men to your door. I will come with her, in the open, and I will leave if you tell me to leave." The line went quiet again, but this silence was different. It was not empty. It was measuring dignity. Finally, Ruth said, "Then she walks in first." Alexander answered without pride, without offense. "Of course." Claire laughed softly from the tasting table, but there was no power left in it. "You are all acting like one little drive can change anything." Maya lowered the phone and looked at her. "That is what people like you always think," she said. "That truth is little because the person carrying it does not look powerful." Ethan gathered the evidence with careful hands. Daniel remained seated, staring at the floor as if it had become the only place left for his shame to hide. Alexander opened the cellar door, and the sound of the restaurant returned above them, hushed and waiting. Maya stepped past him first, exactly as her mother had asked. When she reached the dining room, the staff parted for her again, but this time she did not feel like a server moving through someone else's world. She felt like Samuel Bennett's daughter walking toward the proof he had trusted the future to find. By the time Maya Bennett reached her mother's apartment in Brooklyn, the rain had slowed to a mist that silvered the fire escapes and turned the sidewalk lamps into soft halos. Ruth Bennett opened the door before Maya knocked twice, wearing her blue house robe and the guarded expression of a woman who had spent 8 years listening for trouble in every hallway sound. Her eyes moved first to Maya, then to Alexander Moretti standing several steps behind her with Ethan Graves at his side, both men keeping their hands visible, both men silent because this threshold did not belong to them. Maya stepped inside first, and only after Ruth nodded did Alexander enter. The apartment was small, warm, and painfully ordinary compared to the Silver Dove, with family photographs on the wall, a crocheted blanket over the sofa, and a framed picture of Samuel Bennett smiling in his driver's cap beside a 12-year-old Maya. Alexander paused before that photograph, and something in his face softened without asking permission. Ruth noticed, but she said nothing. She walked to the hallway closet, reached behind folded towels, and removed a shoebox with the careful hands of someone touching a wound. Inside were receipts, old maps, 2 photographs, and a silver flash drive taped beneath the cardboard bottom exactly where Samuel had left it. Maya held it in her palm, smaller than a lipstick, lighter than a key, and somehow heavier than every year her family had been told to forget. Ruth whispered, "Your father said truth does not die just because powerful people bury it." No one spoke after that. Not until Alexander looked at Maya and said, "This goes to people who can put Cain in a courtroom, not in a rumor." For the second time that night, he let her decide. By sunrise, copies of the files had been placed with a federal attorney Samuel Bennett had once trusted, a senior investigative reporter who had refused Cain's money years earlier, and a private legal team that answered to paper, signatures, dates, and proof. The files did not shout. They did not threaten. They simply told the truth in bank transfers, shell companies, forged contracts, and names that had hidden behind charity dinners and ribbon cuttings for too long. Claire Whitmore's engagement. Announcement never appeared in the society pages. Daniel Cross never returned to the Silver Dove. Victor Kane's smile disappeared from billboards and gala invitations, replaced by questions he could no longer laugh away. And Maya, who had expected to lose her job for speaking, returned to the restaurant 3 days later to find the staff waiting near the entrance. Louise stood in front, holding a small bouquet from the corner bodega, embarrassed but proud. The hostess hugged her. The line cooks clapped softly. Even the pianist, who had seen more secrets than most priests, played a gentle tune as she walked in. Alexander was there too, seated alone at table 7, no wineglass in front of him, no guards crowding the room, only a folded envelope on the table. It was not money. Maya would have refused that. It was a letter confirming that her father's case had been reopened, along with a scholarship fund in Samuel Bennett's name for working students who served tables by night and chased degrees by day. Maya read the letter once, then again, her hands trembling at last. Ruth stood beside her, crying silently, not because grief had vanished, but because it had finally been believed. Alexander rose, and this time the room did not go silent out of fear. It went silent out of respect. He looked at Maya as if the title waitress had never been small, as if service had never meant surrender, as if the woman who carried plates through a room of powerful people had carried something far greater all along. "Your father raised a brave daughter," he said. Maya looked at the photograph Ruth had brought with her, at the staff standing straighter, at the table where a glass had remained untouched, and she understood that dignity was not something Claire could insult, Daniel could schedule away, or Victor Kane could bury. It had survived in her mother's closet, in her father's warning, in her own steady voice, and in the 6 words that changed every life in that room. And that morning, beneath the soft gold light of the Silver Dove, the world remembered what dignity looks like.